My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. We've been covering Mahan's meditation and the various practices. And what were the outcomes? And we saw many benefits of this meditation. Of course, the early phases of meditation could be a little bit, if you're not used to it, it takes a little bit of effort. But I think every day, if you do it consistently, you would slowly get to it. You'd get that, connected state. And it takes a while, like anything else, one needs to be able to, put to practice, and slowly you see the changes that are happening. So we covered, so this whole idea, so one of the key concepts that I spoke about the last time is the state of connectedness. And I used this example in the last class of this universal adapter that helps us to power all our equipments wherever we go at whatever state we are in. And using that concept, I said, well, one of the things I found Mahan's meditation was like a universal adapter that helped me at least in different stages of my own life. So the meditation itself helps you to discover your spiritual compass. And the spiritual compass helps you to understand the concept of God, understand the concept of nature, and understand the concept of the self. And in this process, we learn important tools and important skills that helps us to navigate this journey called life. And this journey called life has got different stages. And one of the things that this spiritual compass, or I call it the universal adapter, is that gives us a very sharp intellect that, helps us to be rational in everything that we do, helps us to reason things out and think in a very logical way, and slowly drop off this dogmatic belief system. The moment you believe in something, there is no more learning because you just believe, right? There is no more inquiry and discovery. And this tool also helps us to have a kind of a scientific approach to things in a systematic, logical way that we kind of expound all the thoughts, the experiences, and the truth. And it is based on evidence, and so one of the things that for me was useful is that initially it took a while to discover this compass. Once you discover this compass, it's like a universal adapter that helps you to plug in into different stages of our lives. As a student, as a professional, as a householder, as a community worker, and as we age gracefully and prepare for our final stages in our lives, right? So not only this, but the universal adapter also helps us to plug into the different body of knowledge, and we are able to read the diverse scriptures, scientific book, logical reasoning, and an amazing, body of knowledge that enriches us and enlightens us. It also helps us to reflect our own life, right? And always introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate. And one of the things that we see is that when we acquire this spiritual lens or this universal adapter, no matter what age we are, you see that your trajectory is a different trajectory. You see, great saints, Mahan acquired this at the age of 11, and he pursued it, and he became a Mahan. Adi Shankara also at a very early age. You see all the great scientists, they became great because they started thinking in this way at a very early age, that spiritual connectedness. And I started reflecting back on why some things made sense to me and why some things did not make sense. So here it is that, I want to still speak about what a student means in this journey called life. And to do that, it helps me to map out what life is about. And as I was reflecting this over the last many, many years, uh, I realized that, you know, and I think I spoke about the ABCD up to the Z of life before. And I have it somewhere in the notes. Haven't put it down in a proper, but here it is. It is about being aware that before birth and death, before B and D, there is C, which is choices that we make in our lives. And the choices come with consequences, right? And the consequences, decides the quality of our lives. So here it is that, I want to walk through with you my own reflection on Mahan's life, of course, reflection of many other people's biography and autobiography, and reflecting back. So I realized something, that this divine universal adapter helps us to continuously reflect. There is a wonderful interview that I listened this morning, a really wonderful interview, and I'll post it to the people that really want to hear this. You have to devote about 45 minutes to listening to this very young boy uh, who lost his sight at a very early age, and he's so bubbly and so cheerful. And he gives this interview, which I thought was really profound. He says that, that when you lose the vision of your eye, you can still live, right? So when you lose the sight of your, when you lose the sight of your, let me repeat this again. When you lose your vision of your sight, you can still live. But when you lose your vision of life, you are lost in life. I thought it was really profound. The vision of sight you can still live, but you know the having no vision of your life, you lose everything. You lose your life itself. So I thought it was a very profound statement that I hope some of you all will reflect on when I post it tomorrow. So here it is. I started reflecting a lot on many things, as what Mahan has been speaking about, Guru Sankaran has been speaking about, and all the great scriptures. Here it is that I tried to reflect back in my own ways, that the universal adapter, of course, is the meditation and the spiritual compass. It really gives us a good understanding of what birth and death and everything that happens between birth and death. Most people get so preoccupied with birth. What was I, the previous life, and what happens to death? So we get preoccupied with that. But between birth and death, there is a beautiful symphony that happens. And there are many stations of our lives that sometimes we don't reflect back. And some are fortunate that they start understanding this at a very early age. But others maybe at a later stage, but then are able to recalibrate that. But some completely lose sight and live a life which is not of quality. So here it is, I started reflecting what this being a student means in our lives. So I mapped this kind of stages of our lives that we go through, you know, and where all the learnings come from that we get, because that shapes our quality of life and our way of life. So you see that between birth and death, we have different stations of our lives. And sometimes in some stations we're able to connect, in other stations we cannot connect, right? So our adapter is not fit for purpose. Maybe when we were young, oh, we were all fantastic, exuberant. But as we go through our journey of life, that mindset does not allow us to the quality of life that we aspire or we expect. And you see that people get disappointed. Of course, there are many challenges in life. How do we navigate this through? So I started reflecting back the learnings that one goes through. And of course, at an infant stage, a lot of us don't know many things, and we learn from nature. Many of the infants learn from nature. I can remember things only from the age of 2 to 3, and so before that, something was on autopilot, and that's something most of us don't know, but at a later stage, we know what that is. We also see that the age of 2 to 8 years old is a very, very important age. That is where we pick up languages and our foundational life skills. Some have very good family background. They get good spiritual knowledge, good positive feedback, good encouragement. So the level of intellectual and mental development becomes very strong. So some have very positive parents. They reinforce that, expose them to different things, expose them to new knowledge and the software that builds. And you see that carries through. And some have very difficult, life. Parents may not have had all the luxuries. There's a lot of turbulence, and that carries through in the child. And there is a lesson behind all this, right? So, and as we go through the mid-childhood, between 9 to 12, also there's a lot of changes that are happening in us, and I experienced that changes. That's one of the most difficult period, because you're neither, you're maturing, but you're neither can you make any decisions, but you're learning. There are life skills that make sense of the world, and that's what we learn in school. In school, they teach you about morality, ethics, a whole host of things that we learn, right? Some go to fantastic schools and good teachers. Others have more, varying qualities of teachers, right? And as we go through this journey as a teenager, the kind of skill sets that so I reflected back the kind of skills that I acquired, and the learnings that we got. And then when you become a youth, somewhere between 20 to 25, we go to university. You're lucky if you go to university. But something very interesting happens is that as we mature, you see that, as we finish our university, which most people do at the age of 25, unless you're going to your postgrad and other things, but majority would finish their college and move on to having commitments, which is either buying a home, buying a car, having a family. It's a different type of learning that we get. And and then as we go through that journey, you see that as we age, uh, somewhere, you have your middle age or your middle age crisis comes in, and of course, some have a steady state, their incomes are increasing, the learning is a different learning, and you prepare for retirement. And finally, you have a retirement where you're more mature, hopefully more wiser. And this is what goes through for most people. And and we see that our formative years of learning is actually in this period. We really take the time to learn. We have exams, we have tests, we have teachers that really oversee us and everything, right? But after we finish university, most people stop learning. At least in my generation, people used to read and do things. But in this current generation, you see many people don't read. They are in the TikTok culture, you know. Something very interesting I heard, which was I was speaking to a profound scientist. He was saying that the more digital skills that we use, the less we think deeply, our mental muscles wither away, like any other muscles. So if we sit in front of a computer or we sit in front of a TV and vegetate, and if we don't think deeply, our mental and intellectual muscles really goes down. And she is a scientist, and she does a lot of work on AI. She says that uh, when we use everything for AI today, we have Chat GPT and other things. Anything we want to go to Chat GPT, we don't have to think deeply. You see that we lose our mental muscles, and you see that the Newtons and the Einsteins disappear because they had to think really hard to push their mental muscles. So we see that most people's student life or life of learning happens right up to the age of 25, and after they finished, they're busy doing everything else, and that deep learning is not there anymore because there's no examinations and so on. And most people, the mindset starts changing, and you see that the mental muscles, it's like somebody who's carrying weights, and they build the muscles, and after a while they stop building the muscles and everything starts withering. So the same thing with our own learning, right? So, but what is really interesting is that today we have what we call lifelong learning. We continuously learn. There are people that learn, go to university, no matter what age, they're always doing something really serious. And this is good because it keeps them active mentally and intellectually, and that's why reading is so important. Not just watching TV, and reading deep knowledge is very important. And I realized that I think our generation is probably the last generation that reads a lot of book, right? At least real books. And that's why I'm hoping that we'll be able to get the library going by this year in the Klang Center. Not that many people will read. So this is one kind of learning that we see, that we come from a generation that we continuously learn. But beyond that learning, something also is very important, is that learning is one thing. Learning for the sake of, what we call, what's happening daily, keeping up to date, all those things is very important. But what I learned from Mahan and Guru Sangaran and my gurus is learning one thing is important, but learning to divinize learning. This is something that is really important in every stages of our lives. Why this is really important is that when we learn, even at the age of 2 to 8 years old, when we integrate that spiritual learning in our foundational skills, we not only learn life skills, we also learn spiritual skills that helps us to learn to live our lives in the most potential, the best possible way. So divinizing at every stages of our lives, we see that knowledge becomes much more deeper and much more profound. It is not just a material knowledge. You see that in the early years, you see that most of the teachings took place in ashrams and spiritual abodes, where they taught not only about life skills, but they also taught about great philosophies and eternal knowledge, that they were able to understand their own spirituality in the context of the material world. Today, we don't have that. Everything we teach is about the material world. And this goes on in the mid-childhood. The child is thinking a lot more deeper. He's learning your mathematics and learning your physics. And so they're now contextualizing it in the context of the greater realm, the creator, the creative force, not just learning mathematics and physics and chemistry so that I can get a job, so that I can get a title. So you see that the divinizing becomes much more profound. I was really fortunate that, Mahan, in that ages of 12 to 18 years old, I had a lot of interaction with Mahan. 1976, I was 12 years old. 1980, I was 16 years old. So that period was a formative years that we were thinking about knowledge for, of course, life skills and also building more independent life skills. Because the age of 13 to 19 is knowledge for you to be independent, because after 18, most people either go to work or they go on to doing advanced. So that age, 13 to 19, was a very important age because it's teaching you skill sets to live independently, think independently. And that period is when you infuse that knowledge with spiritual knowledge, you start thinking about your own individual identity. That in identity, the knowledge of the individual identity helps us to enhance our own independent learning and creativity. It's not just for our life skills and professional skills, but it's much more deeper of understanding who we are. And this is what divinizing learning means. From the foundational skills to making sense of the world, where did this world come from, the relationship within nature, God, and the self. You know, by the time 13 to 19 years old, you're doing deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and there's a convergence that are happening between God, the concept of God, nature, and the self. And there is a deepening of that happens in that age of 13 to 19 years old. And as you become youth, as you go on to learning professional skills, it's not just professional skills, but you are now divinizing your professional skill sets to see that what I learned, how can it be of service to everyone else? And this is the wonderful part of divinizing that learning, is that you're not studying to get a job and do really well. It's not just about your own economic prosperity, but also your overall health and well-being and your spiritual health. So you start thinking now in that formative years of the knowledge that builds your 10 important capital, that spiritual connectedness that leads to the health of the body and the mind, the whole works. So that age between 13 to 25 is the age that our learning deepens. And as we divinize that knowledge, we see that what we learn aids us to understand this trinity between nature, God, and also our own self. That is the foundation that is really important. And you see that the great saints and sages, that is the period they really, really ramped up their deepening their learning and became very evolved in their thinking. Look at Shankara, Mahan, all these great people. So that deepened knowledge is what this student of life is, you see. So it says, and the same thing, of course, we acquire professional knowledge to divinize our lives. It's not just professional knowledge to make a lot of money and build status, but professional knowledge to improve our health and well-being, our quality of life, and build the 10 capitals of life. And you see that it reinforces, the quality, but more importantly, as we progress through life, it helps us to manage our commitments and our family life, our professional life in a more balanced way. We don't get overly caught up. And as we navigate through this journey, you see that you don't become overly caught up by this, the search for material wealth. Everything is in the context of that 10 capitals. And you achieve the steady state, a kind of a blissful state of existence and gracefully preparing for retirement. And this is something that is very fascinating, that great saints and sages and great people, they're able to acquire that resources to help them prepare for retirement. There comes a stage where they don't have to do it anymore, but everything is looked after, and they age gracefully. And retirement itself is not retirement. Actually, it is slowly stepping away from your material commitments, but learning this knowledge to share with others in terms of knowledge, resources, ideas, and live a very happy life, And of course, above 65, you're able to do your job, fantastic. And if you look at the average age for most people, Malaysia is about, I think, 74 years for males and 76 years for females. But today, if one is able to divinize and live a happy life, stressless life, you see that they can live a quality life. So this is what, aging gracefully and, becoming more wise in our different stages of our lives and not worried about death. I'm covering this wonderful scripture called the Katha Upanishad about death, how beautifully it is explained what self is and soul enriching knowledge and experience. So over this journey, uh, learning becomes not just for professional, acquisition of a good professional life, but it's much more deeper than that. And that's what gives us a spectacular life, an enlightened and a completeness life. This is Mahan calls it the Paripurnam, the knowledge that gives us the Paripurnam. At every station of our lives, we see that enrichment. We're able to plug into every station of our lives in every situations and circumstances. And that is what the universal adapter is. And, if one starts at an early age, they'd be able to do really well in every facet. But it doesn't, it can start at any moment in one's life. One could be 60, 70, 80 years old and still start and have that positive and happy outlook in life. And you really enjoy this journey called life and you learn from it, you enrich it, and you show that to others in terms of how one can live. So for me, this universal adapter over the many years has been the guide towards, the different learnings that uh, I had that opportunity with, from the age of 12 right up to now. And the beautiful part of this divinizing learning is you never stop learning. And a good guru is always a good student. A good teacher is always a good student. So this is what, that universal adapter has, enriched my life, and this Mahan's teachings has been an important guide. In the next class, I'll talk about how one, divinize that professional way of life and the kind of experiences one gets, the kind of insights you get. So whether you are a, teacher or professor or businessman or a politician, how does one divinize and really do really well in their profession and meet all the commitments and their duties in their lives and prepare for a kind of a wonderful next phase of one's life. And I believe that's what Mahan wanted to teach everybody, that through this meditation, through this introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and service, one can live a fantastic, spectacular, enlightened, and a complete life. And that's what makes this journey really fun and exciting. So with that, I'm going to stop and perhaps maybe have a more discussion in terms of what learning is. And this is one of the reasons why in many of our satsangs, my satsangs, including in Klang, we're doing really profound teachings of the Upanishads and other great teachings, is really to make people think, to deepen that knowledge, to deepen the curiosity, to deepen that love for learning and love for divinizing what we learn, and love for that divinized knowledge to be put into practice to divinize our own life. And this is what we try to do in all our centers, both in Klang and in our KL center. And I'm sure, um, and also, telling, advising, and of course this online forum, and creating the content for people to continue to have that continuous divinized learning. So with that, we'll take some questions or comments, and in the next phase of this discussion today. So Sandosham, thank you.